So now that you master all the basic stuff that is required to run Ansible playbooks, we're going to look at ways to make them a little bit more efficient by using playbook logic. One of the first things that you may want to do is to loop and repeat the same task with different parameters. So this is what I'm going to do now. I'm going to create a playbook for video.yaml, and this playbook is going to have one play, and it's going to run on my EC2 instance, which I already created, and it's actually fully configured to run the web application. So as an example, let's say create a directory, and I'm going to use become true here. It's very easy to create a new directory in Ansible, you know that, but it's also very easy to repeat the same task with different parameters. So in my case, what I'm going to do is I'm going to use the file module. And in this file module, I'm going to create a path. I'm not sure which path I'm going to create. I'm going to make sure that this is a directory. So the path could be, let's say, for instance, /backend, and you could run this on your instance, let's say /example. You could run this on your instance, and it would probably work. Let's make that happen. Ansible, I already have my instance created in my EC2 dashboard, and now I can Ansible playbook. I'm going to put -v video.yaml. So I use -v so I can have more information about what's going on, and I can debug my variables. All right, so I have now created a directory in /example. Now, let's say I would like to create a bunch of directories and use only one task. I can do that using a loop approach in Ansible. For instance, a very typical way of doing that would be to use a loop. And then I want to create /example /video /something else. And now here, instead of using the path, we're going to use a variable. So the loop instruction here is going to populate a special variable called item. So if I use item here in my task, this item will take successively /example /video /something else, and my task is going to run 3 times. Save my playbook and I run it again. So the first task is going to be an OK, because obviously I already created /example, but now I created also /video and /something else. So this is a very powerful way of repeating one task by using different parameters for this task. Now this is good, but it also works with all kind of data structures. At the moment here, I'm looping through a list, but I could pretty much loop through a list of dictionaries, for instance. So let's say I have user Ubuntu path /example 1, 2, 3. And I would like to create another folder that belongs to the backend. And this folder should be in the /mybackend folder. And then here I'm going to create a folder which is going to be belonging to root, and that's going to be /another folder. Now, when I'm going to loop through this list, item is going to be one of these blobs, which is actually a dictionary. So that means that item will actually be a mapping that has two keys, user and path. So if I want to access the path of the item, I'll go item.path here. And obviously I provided a user so that I can use owner and then use the owner that is specified in my dictionary. So now I'm going to create /example123 belongs to Ubuntu, /my backend belongs to backend, /another belongs to root. I run this. To -v, you have more debug information. Okay, so /example123 has been created. The owner is Ubuntu. /my backend has been created. The owner is backend, and so on and so forth. Now, as usual, I have an SSH connection next to my Ansible playbook, so I can actually check this to be extremely sure. So /example123 is a folder which is owned by Ubuntu, which is what my playbook was asked. Ubuntu creates /example123. Backend creates /my backend. So obviously the backend user here worked because I already run the whole playbook to create the application, and it includes the creation of my backend user. So this is why I could make this folder owned by the backend user. So this is one thing about loops. Sorry, it's quite straightforward to use. You can just use loop and then the list of items you want to loop. There is an earlier syntax for loops in Ansible, which is with items, and you should try to avoid it because it's going to be deprecated anytime soon. Okay, so that was loops. Now we can have a look at conditions. As you know, we are working with infrastructure as code. So there are lots of concepts from programming which apply to infrastructure as code. We've just seen loops. Looping is one of the basic computing structure that you can think of in programming. The next one is usually conditions. So if statements and how we can make them happen in Ansible. So in Ansible, if statements are not really ifs, they're called when. So basically, you are going to write, and I'm going to clean up my playbook here. You're going to write a condition in the when statement of a task. So let's say, so I'm going to take a real world example for the lab. Here in this, on this machine, I already installed mysql. I created a user and a database. And I can check that. Show databases, select star from backend.item. All right, so I have an empty database here. So the thing that I'm going to achieve now is to make sure that I will insert data in my database, but only once. So I just want to make sure that I insert my data only once. So what I'm going to do is that I'm going to make a select statement in Ansible, look at how many answers I get back from that select statement in my database, and then based on the result, I'm going to run another statement which may or may not be skipped. So let's make that work. So here we're going to query the database. We don't need to become true here, and we can use mysql query as the Ansible module. Just pulling up the mysql query help page in my browser, so I can switch to it when required. Okay, so my mysql query is going to connect to my own MySQL server, I think my user is example and my password is secure. I'm not pretty sure, but we'll see how that goes. And then my query is going to be selecting everything from backend.item. So I'm going to use select because I'm not going to select star because that's not really powerful. I'm going to select BCIT ID from backend.item. So that's going to be my query. And then I'm not really sure what this is going to work. So I'm just going to run this playbook and see if it works. I should have used -v to see the output of the module. So this is playing on my EC2 instance. It already has MySQL installed. Okay, it's actually working. So it queried the database. It tried to do a SQL query on the MySQL database, and there was no results, obviously. And that's good. The row count was 0. That's great. So we can probably use that as a good variable to know whether or not we already have something in our database. So actually what I want to do is only insert a MySQL entry when there is nothing in my database, but there is not my name. So that I just want my own name and BCIT ID to be inserted in the database if they are not there already. So I'm not really sure how you do that with the MySQL query plugin. So I'm going to switch to my browser here. All right. And you probably have some really good example. Select star from where ID equals and star equals. So this is also something that's very important in database manipulation that you probably heard about in other classes. You always want to escape the arguments here to prevent security issues with SQL injection. So here, this is what happens. You're providing the positional arguments as arguments to the module to make sure that everything is going to be escaped. So we're going to do the same. I'm just going to filter for my name, Tim. Let me switch back to my terminal. I'm going to use S, and here I'm going to have positional arguments, only one. And that's going to be, let's say, Tim. Okay. That sounds good. Now we can register this like MySQL query data. And here we can print out the number of rows of the first query. I'm going to use debug. And here I'm going to use there. So MySQL, query data dot row count seems to be what we have, but you can see here that this is actually a list. So we want to take the first element of the list because there could be multiple queries executed. And in my case, there's only one, but still the answer comes back as a list. So I'm going to look at the first element of the list, and that should give me the number of rows that were modified by that first query. Okay. So now we have this going on. Let's run the playbook. Okay. I made a mistake here. Yeah, it's positional args and not positional arguments. It's actually written here, positional args. Okay, so this is happening again. 0 rows were found. So this is what we're going to use as a conditional to decide whether or not we want to insert our name in the database. So this is going to be the next task. Now insert name into DB. I'm going to use MySQL query once again. The user I'm using is example. Pretty much copy these lines. I'm going to copy these lines here, and now I'm going to insert into BCIT ID. No, insert into backend.item. I think it's BCIT ID name, values, and then once again, we are going to use argument escaping. So now the first thing is going to be my ID, and the second thing is going to be my name. Because this is my ID here, and this is my name here. So the first one is my ID, the second one is my name. And here, this is where I'm going to use the when statement. So this is going to be run only when I have no rows in the database that match my query. So when this row count is equal to 0, then I'm going to insert data into my database. No, it found 0 rows in the database with this information matching my name. Because the when condition was false, was true, the task ran. So it did insert my name into the database by running the SQL query. Now, if I run the playbook again, if I didn't get it wrong, it's going to query the database. This time, 1 row was found because it was already inserted in the database from the previous run of the playbook. Because of that, the when condition became false. And because the when condition became false, then Ansible skipped the task. So because my SQL query is not by itself an idempotent Ansible module, you have to add a little bit of logic on your playbook to make it idempotent. So this is what happened here. If I didn't have that, it would insert over and over a lot of entries in my database, which is not what we want because we will have duplicate names in our database. And now if you look at the actual application online, now you see that this is where this was coming from. And you can get back to your playbook and you can change the values. So let's say instead of using Tim, let's use Jack Sparrow, and we'll change values here. Okay, now if we run it, because it will have different values, it will not find the rows in the database. So it should have 0, so it will now insert 1 in the database. So if I refresh my page in the browser, I will now have 2 names showing up on my interface. This is the first one that I added, and this is the second. And once again, this is now also idempotent. If I run it again on my terminal here, because the entry is already in the MySQL database, then it will basically just skip the task. So loops using loop, conditionals using when. A very common use case for when is to restart services only when configuration files are changed. So I probably have an nginx file here. So I have an nginx file here. I'm going to change it a little bit. Slash example. I'm going to use proxy, but this is just for the example. It's not going to work because I don't have any service on 8000, but it's just for the example. So now what I'm going to do is I want to copy that file to my remote target, and I want to restart nginx only if the file has been actually changed. So I'm going to call this when.yaml. And here, pretty typical, I'm going to write a playbook that runs on my EC2 instances. Oops. And the task will be a provision nginx file. I'm going to use root because I'm going to copy it into a place where I don't have permissions. I think mine is called like this, which should be something like this, I believe. Yeah. And we're going to register this into nginx. Hoping that this is fine. Yeah, fine. Okay, let's try. So we can run the playbook. Mm-hmm. Okay, so we've just provisioned the configuration file. Obviously, this is idempotent. So if we provision it again, and the file will not change, which means that we are going to use become true and use the systemd. Here we're going to use nginx, and we are going to restart nginx. So now the problem with this is because the restart task of the systemd module is not idempotent, it will restart nginx every time we are running the playbook, which is not something that we actually want, because we only want to restart the service if something was changed on the configuration file. So this is where we can use when, and when we can also use the special attributes coming back from an Ansible task. Well, this was not a lot of information here, but for the provisioning of the configuration file, remember that you have a changed here that comes back, which can be true or false. So now if you edit your playbook and you do something like this, when nginx.conf.changed, this is going to be a Boolean, so it will be interpreted like a Boolean. So when the task nginx.conf has changed something on the remote target, then you are going to restart nginx. Now, if you run this, obviously my nginx configuration file has been already provisioned, so it's already on the remote target. So because of that, nothing has changed. Changed is false, and the task is skipped. Now, if I edit my configuration file and I remove these 3 lines here that are not useful, and I run my playbook again, when provisioning this configuration file, it will be a new file, a different file. So it will be changed. And because it's going to be changed, then nginx is going to be actually restarted. If I run it again, because the file is already provisioned, then nginx will not be restarted. That's a very common use case of when. Use it to change the behavior of your playbook based on the output of previous tasks. The next thing that I wanted to talk about was inclusion and imports. So pretty much like in programming, you can also create blocks of logic in Ansible and then include or import that logic from another playbook. There are just one trick here that you need to remember. So this is going to be the video.yaml playbook. What I'm going to do, I'm going to create imported.yaml. So I created a new file here called imported.yaml, and there is something in Ansible that you can do, which is to import a tasks file. And I insist on the fact that it's going to be a task file and not a playbook. So because it's going to be a task file, it's going to be a plain YAML file that contains a list of tasks and not a full playbook with plays. All right. So what I'm going to do here is that I'm going to move my tasks that are in my playbook into a separate task file, and I'm going to import that task file from my playbook. So I've got this that I want to take away and put here, and then here I'm going to just remove the extra white space at the beginning of the line, and this is it. All right, and now I can probably try to improve. Yeah, okay. So now this is good. So now you see this is a task file. It doesn't have hosts or anything. It's just a basic list of tasks in Ansible, in YAML. I can move back to my playbook. This is my actual playbook that has a host and a list of tasks. And now I can import external playbook. And now you can do import tasks, imported.yaml. All right, so this is now these are my two files. This is my playbook. You see that my playbook will import the file called imported.yaml, and this imported.yaml file has all my tasks. So now if I run my playbook, how is it called? Video.yaml. What's going to happen is that at parse time, all the tasks that were in imported.yaml will be brought over to my playbook, and they are going to be run as if they were part of the playbook. So this is where here you see that I don't even see any import thing. I just move to the actual tasks of my task file. You can also do include, but it's slightly different, and you'll see why later with the tags. Include is slightly different. Include is an actual task, so you can see it here. It's an actual task that you will see in running your playbook. And what this does is that at runtime, and not at parse time, at runtime, it will run the imported file and the tasks that are coming with it. So this is not important at that stage because it looks exactly the same, but it's going to be really important in a few minutes when we are going to play with tags, because they don't have the same behavior. So remember that import and include look like they do exactly the same thing, but the way they work is excessively different from one another. This is what's important. So once again, loops with loop, conditions with when, and now you can import and include with import task, include tasks. Remember that everything you are importing is a task file and not a playbook. You can import a playbook, but that's a different story. It's just a task file. Okay, so now this is pretty good. We have a lot of the basic logic we need for programming that's available in Ansible. the last thing that we need is some kind of flags or runtime arguments. And this is what is achieved in Ansible using tags. So tags are simply a way of selecting which tasks you want to run from a specific playbook. So like everything else, I have some material on the website, and here you have a couple of things that can help you work with tags. What's really important is to understand how tags work and how you can use them. So I'm going to use tags.yaml. Actually, I'm going to reuse my video.yaml. So that's going to be my new task file, and I'm just going to get my tasks from the other file. I thought I had some Nginx stuff going on, and maybe in the when.yaml. Yeah. Okay, so I'm going to basically just provision the Nginx configuration file in my playbook. So this is what I want to do. And I'm going to make another task. Okay, so I have now two tasks in my playbook, and I'm going to use tags to select which ones I want to run at runtime. So now if I run my playbook like this, nothing specific is going to happen. All the tasks are going to be run because I didn't specify any tags. Now for each task, you can add a tag, and you can have several of them, so they can be a list. So let's say we'll use Nginx and example. And for this one, we'll use, well, let's say example and debug. Okay, so now we have two tags for each task. So something that is really powerful now is that you can do --tags Nginx, for instance. Now only the task with the Nginx tag are going to be run. As you can see, the other debug task was not run. This is the tags. So because this task here has Nginx, it's going to run because I asked Nginx tag to run. Now, if I use example, these two tasks are going to run because both of them have the example tag. Well, hi there, and provisioning of the Nginx configuration. So this is how tags work. You just give tags to your tasks, and then at runtime, you can select which tags you want to run or not. Now, there are a couple of special tags. Let's say, for instance, here, I'm adding the always tag. This is a special tag that will make sure that the task is always run unless I specifically skip it. So now if I run tags Nginx, my Nginx task is the first one, so it's going to run. But my second task has always in it, so it's also going to run all the time, except if I ask to skip it. So now if I ask to skip the debug tag, because the debug tag goes together with my always, it's been explicitly skipped. So now it's not going to run. So that's the first special tag you can have. So that's always. The other tag you can have is also never. So if you use never, the task will never, ever run unless you ask to run it specifically. So here I don't provide any tags. When I don't provide any tags, the task will just run as usual. So I'm not sure why it's taking so long right now. Okay. Okay, so now I don't have any specific tags, so my tasks are just going to run. I happen to have the debug task, but because my Nginx task is tagged as never, it will never run unless I ask to run it specifically. So now if I do tags Nginx, I ask for this tag specifically, explicitly. So now this task is going to run. So ansible tags, they're really powerful because you can, if you combine them together, they can be really useful in selecting the kind of tasks that you want to run. There's a catch though. The behavior of import and include can be a little bit confusing when working with tags. So I'm going to prepare a couple of files to show that to you. Okay, so this is an example that I selected because it happens a lot with students when using tags. So this is my playbook. It's a very typical way of working with EC2 instances. I have just a couple tasks on localhost, and I'm going to pretend that I'm creating instances on AWS. So first of all, I'm going to gather some information about my instances and my VPC. And then I will have two possible tasks in my playbook. One is going to create the EC2 instance, and the other one is going to destroy the EC2 instance. And because all my EC2 instance things are in the same task file, ec2.yaml, I'm just importing them and using the proper tag whenever I need it. So now my ec2.yaml looks like this. It actually does not destroy and create an instance. It's just debug, print messages. So you have two tasks in it. One is the destroy task, which is destroying the instance. And the other one is the provision task, which is creating the instance. So this is very similar to what you have to do in the lab, where if you use provision, you create the instance. If you use destroy, you delete the instance. And you would expect that this is going to work fine just because here you're using tags to filter the moment you are going to run these imports. So if you look at this, I would feel safe running tags.yaml using the provision tag, because I know I'm not going to destroy my instance, right? It's only this is going to run, and this is going to import ec2.yaml, and this as one task tagged with provision, which is this one. So it should be all good. The problem is that if you run this playbook with the tags provision, you will be in for a surprise. Because as you can see, I am destroying the instance when I only wanted to provision it. So this is the trick with include and import. When you do import, what's going to happen is that Ansible, before even running the playbook, will take the contents of ec2.yaml and will put them into your tags.yaml playbook. And it's not going to adjust the tags for it. It's just going to put the tasks as is. And you can see it by running ansible playbook -- list tasks on your tags.yaml. And you see that this destroy instance here is being tagged with both destroy and provision because of the first import statement in the playbook. So you have to be extremely careful when using import and tags. It's the same with when. When will behave differently whether you use import or include. So now if I edit my playbook again, and now I'm using include instead of import, and I look at my tasks, you will see that the situation has been changed, because now what's going on is that Ansible will only include the tasks at runtime, which means that it will go through the playbook when it meets the include task statement. Only at that stage will it go into the file, and then it will follow the tasks that are in that file and will only match the tags that were required. So this is why you have only 2 tasks here, which is probably what you want, instead of 4 when you were using import. If you run the playbook, no, not these tasks, just run the playbook with provision. Now you actually get to filter the tags properly only on the creation of the instance. And if you want to destroy your instance, this is also going to work fine. So once again, be extremely careful when using import and include. Include will include the file at runtime, so it will have a dedicated task for the import, but it will not apply the task to all the included tasks. Whereas when you use import, it will copy all the tasks from the file and will also add the condition or the tag to all the tasks that are being imported. So there are situations where this is not desirable. There are situations where this is good. So it really depends on what you want to achieve. But remember that import and include, you have to be wary when manipulating them because they can have a behavior that's slightly strong. So with all that, you should be able to build the playbook, the final playbook for the assignment, where you can basically create your VPC and EC2 infrastructure. Then based on conditions and tags, run the provisioning of the application. And you can also debug a couple of informative messages on the terminal, like the IP address of the instance and whatnot. And then make a tag that will allow you to destroy the EC2 instance when you're done, which will allow you to not be charged for this system when it's not being used. All right, thank you